Today, I'd like to introduce you to a man who goes by the unusual name of Skeet. Skeet's passion is bar trivia night. He's been playing for many years. He goes with a group of friends. They compete as a team. Now, Skeet is the only member of this group who does not possess an advanced educational degree. So to compensate for his feelings of inferiority, back in the day, he told the team that he's actually got a master's degree. Lately, that lie has been bugging him. It's been eating at his conscience, and he's afraid of confessing it, particularly to his friend Trisha, who he fears is going to react angrily and ultimately reject him as a friend. So randomly, he responds to a Craigslist ad, and he gets involved with a reality show by Nathan Fielder, whose intention is to help him deal with this issue. Now, if you don't know Nathan Fielder, he's best known for his show Nathan for You, where he provides wacky advice to small business owners. However, the genius of that show is how it uses that premise to explore the interplay between people in odd social situations, let's just say. So he's got a new show on HBO called The Rehearsal. In this one, Nathan, he actually takes people facing a variety of stressful situations in the relationships where they might be facing a conflict or a difficult conversation, and he rehearses these situations over and over again with them so that they'll feel confident when they actually go into the situation. And he creates these extremely elaborate reconstructions of the situation, and the level of detail that he goes to is part of what makes the show so fascinating. Nathan actually hires an actress to portray Skeet's friend Trisha, and he sets up a situation where the actress meets and interviews the real Trisha for a blog, ostensibly, so she can learn and copy her mannerisms before the rehearsal. Nathan also constructs an exact replica of the bar where the trivia night is held, down to the exact chairs, et cetera, in a warehouse. Then they set up a one-on-one meeting between Skeet and Trisha at the next bar trivia night, and they go ahead and rehearse it countless times. They even develop an elaborate dialogue tree for every potentiality that might come up.
Are you starting with presidents?
No, I started with twins.
Oh, you want twins and then go to president?
They go through every potentiality, including a good outcome where he ends up going home with her and a terrible outcome where she completely rejects him, and then the entire bar mocks him and he leaves in shame.
I don't understand why you felt the need to lie about your education. I mean, it's really messed up. You said you had a master's degree, and that was all bullshit. I don't want to talk to you again.
Please don't go.
He lied about having a master's degree.
No master's degree?
This guy is such a fraud.
Who doesn't have a master's degree?
And the loser of tonight's trivia is Skeet.
Are you sure you want to do this? For sure?
Still felt good that I got off my chest. Even if it means I might lose a friendship in the process.
I don't think it'll go that bad. But
the question remains, will he be able to go through with it on the actual night? Is it going to blow up in his face and ruin his relationship with his friend? Let's find out.
When he returned to the table to wait for his pizzas, Trisha wasn't talking. It was the perfect opportunity to begin his confession, but he wasn't doing it.
Yeah, the pizza tastes better after a certain period of time. The pizza's good, but then hits it to the last spot, especially after a couple of rums and cokes.
All right, so now we see where his carefully rehearsed plan is starting to go off the track. His voice begins wavering, his entire posture changes. You can see that his physicality is completely racked with physical tension. He's barely able to get the words out. He's darting around, looking around nervously. His entire demeanor changes. And this is symptomatic of what we call attention entanglement. In particular, the judgmental entanglement, which is the granddaddy of all the others. And this is where your mind anticipates that there's about to be a change in the quantity or quality of emotional energy that you're communicating that might result in you being judged. So what it'll do is it'll call into play physical tension as the enforcer to shut that down and prevent you from expressing whatever it is that might result in that judgment. So everything's been fine up to this point, but this is where he realizes, okay, I'm about to go into the confession. Now all of a sudden those entanglements come to the fore. And is he going to be able to navigate this successfully?
He just sat there.
He's so nervous. Look at this. You could read it on him, clear as day, like a neon sign, the tension. Looking for the pizza. Where's the pizza? Where's the pizza? Distract from the situation at hand.
Oh my gosh.
I was gonna say.
There's been something in my mind I've had to deal with, and you know.
Oh no, he started, but then the pizza right. Oh no.
Okay. Almost around the corner.
What's that?
They ring the bell. They're getting closer to making the pizza.
I get you. No, what were you saying before?
I feel bad that it's been bothered me a long time to tell you this.
What's that?
So this is very interesting because we've all been in this place. You know exactly what he's feeling right now just by watching this. You might feel a cringe. You might feel a secondhand embarrassment. You might feel, oh man, I know what that feels like. When you're trying to say something, either you're perhaps in some sort of argument with a roommate or something, and all of a sudden you just get so worked up, and you might have rehearsed this in your mind a million times, and in your mind you're like, you said it confidently and smooth, and it came out, and it was assertive, but then once you get there, your whole physicality just tenses up. The adrenaline floods in, and you can barely even breathe. It's interesting to see it from a third-person perspective. Most of my teachings revolve around developing awareness. When you're in this moment, you don't know what you look like. You just know that it's not coming out right. Since we are our own instrument, it's very difficult to know exactly what we're projecting. So developing awareness is the first step to sort of learning to manage these states better.
My whole educational life has been like a kind of a fraud.
Really?
Yeah. Said that I got a master's degree, and I kind of went along with it.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was only got my bachelor's degree at the time.
It's still pretty impressive. I mean, you know, lots of people don't have bachelor's degrees.
I came into the group, the trivia group, and I kind of felt like inferior about that.
That's so silly. You don't should feel silly about that. Lots of people barely even finish high school.
Well, I just, you know, and I kept that lie going on all that time, and it kind of aided me.
The central tenet of cognitive science is that the brain is an information processing organ. But emotions aren't just these superfluous extra things. They're actually integrated with our entire communication system. So as Skeet got ready to confess, his emotional state was profoundly affecting his cognitive function. And this wasn't just some abstract state of mind. As we saw, it physically manifested. It changed his behavior. It changed the way he was speaking. This is basically the manifestation of what Daniel Goleman would call an emotional hijack. Despite all of his rehearsing, the anxiety was able to override his rehearsed responses. When our emotions run high, they can actually override our rational mind. In his book, The Emotional Brain, Joseph Ledoux's dual pathway theory proposed that sensory inputs can either go through the low road, which is the emotional instinctive pathway, or the high road, which is the cognitive pathway, the rational pathway. And the interplay between these pathways determines how we ultimately respond to things and communicate. So when Skeet was rehearsing the confession, he was essentially priming the high road. He was using his rational thought to prepare himself for everything that might happen. His prefrontal cortex was developing strategies, was predicting outcomes, it was processing the information provided by Nathan, et cetera, et cetera. His amygdala, responsible for triggering the fear response, it was more subdued during the rehearsals because the situation was not perceived as an immediate threat. And this is a form essentially of extinction therapy. By predicting the potential reactions from Trisha and practicing the responses that he would give, he was essentially exposing himself to his fear in a controlled environment. And this can help reduce the fear response as your brain learns that the outcome that you're fearing isn't as harmful as you initially think it might be. That's how extinction therapy works. However, when he was confronted with the actual situation, his low road dominated, and that triggered that emotional response that overrode the rehearsed responses and resulted in that physical and mental agitation. The amygdala kicks into overdrive when we experience this. This releases stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. It prepares you for a fight or flight response. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, that can actually become reduced in its ability to function when we're under stress. And look, this is useful from an evolutionary standpoint. In a dangerous situation, it's much more important to react quickly than to, weigh all your options logically. The autonomic nervous system, which controls bodily functions that we are not consciously directing, like heartbeat or digestion, that in turn escalates these physical responses, causing physical signs of extreme nervousness. Now in Skeet's case, this resulted in the rehearsed strategies just bloop, going out the window as he's visibly racked with fear and tension. His intellectual understanding of the situation, it just wasn't enough to override that emotional response. It's like he knew logically that confessing wasn't going to result in him being physically harmed, but his emotional system was effectively locked into that fear response. Now here's the catch. Our amygdala's response, it's based on perceived threat, not actual threat. When this reaction is out of proportion to the actual threat, as is often the case with social anxiety, it can be disruptive, even debilitating to your quality of life because you can't take action. You avoid conflicts, they don't get resolved, you can't step up and meet the people that you want to connect with, et cetera, et cetera. And again, this dovetails into that idea of tension entanglements. These are complex knots formed from intertwined threads of thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. In Skeet's case, his fear, the thought of confession, and visible agitation created this tension entanglement that kept him locked in that state. Now, the process of disentangling these knots, it's very challenging, and it requires a deep understanding of the interplay between emotions and cognitive processes, intuitive energies, physicality, and this forms the core of what I've been teaching for the past 5 or 6 years now. It's well known that the connections from the cortical areas down to the amygdala are far weaker than the connections from the amygdala up to the cortex. And this might explain why it's so easy for emotional information to overwhelm our conscious thoughts in these moments of stress, but it's so hard for us to gain conscious control over our emotions. This asymmetry in connections between the cortex and the amygdala might explain why it's so hard to reduce our anxiety when we're approaching people. However, through the power of neuroplasticity, we can actually reshape our brain's response to these situations. Techniques like mindfulness, meditation can actually help with this. In fact, I think that if you're not meditating, you're watching this, you need to start because it's one of literally the most beneficial things that you could do to improve your ability to handle these situations. In my teachings over the years, I've accumulated strategies from a wide variety of disciplines that can help clients to address these issues. First off, the practices of actors and performers can provide a lot of insight. For example, rehearsal, as we see from the show, it doesn't just involve memorizing lines, but also becoming comfortable with the feeling of being in the spotlight, right? Learning to be the center of attention where all eyes are on you, and learning to channel nervous energy into performance energy. The ability to create and inhabit a character can also provide something of a psychological buffer that lets you approach these situations with a little bit of detachment. When actors prepare for a role, they learn to control their emotions in order to portray the characters authentically. And this involves often emotional recall, where they tap into personal experiences to mirror the emotional state of their character. They can learn to summon emotions at will, and then perhaps more crucially, let them go once the scene is over. Improv, of course, also has many, many valuable lessons. Improv teaches participants to be present, to open themselves freely, to allow intuitive energies free reign, to accept what's given to them in the interaction and build upon it, you know, the classic yes and approach, and to make their partners look good in the scene. And these principles can reduce social anxiety because they shift the focus from self-performance to mutual collaboration in a conversation. Physicality is, of course, also essential in performance training. You know, actors use warm-ups, they use physical exercises, they use techniques such as the Alexander technique to help manage their physical presence and help release tension. I've got several videos on Alexander technique. I practice it extensively myself. It's very valuable. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's a type of treatment that largely focuses on identifying and challenging negative thought patterns and behaviors. So they use techniques like cognitive restructuring to help you identify irrational thoughts. For example, I'm not good enough, or if this person doesn't like me, it means I'm fundamentally unattractive. You can take those and replace them with more rational alternatives like, for example, not everybody's gonna like me, and that's fine. It doesn't reflect my fundamental value as a human being. Now, we talked about how the rehearsal process in the show was a form of extinction therapy, and that's also an element of cognitive behavioral therapy. If you struggle with social situations like introducing yourself to new people, you might feel anxiety or fear over all of those potential negative outcomes: rejection, embarrassment, loss of validation, potential confrontation, etc. So extinction therapy in this context, would involve repeated exposure to these feared social situations in a controlled way, a relatively controlled way, without those feared negative outcomes occurring. And this is very similar to what we do in our live trainings. Every successful introduction that doesn't result in that feared negative outcome of like total humiliation and destruction, you're vaporized and ridiculed by everyone in the vicinity. Every time that doesn't happen, that helps to weaken that association between introducing yourself to people and anxiety or fear, and that reduces the intensity of that response over time. And this is what I did myself when I first started out many years ago. I couldn't even look people in the eye, so I just practiced doing that. I'd walk around downtown on my lunch break and I would just look various people in the eye. After that, I would just say hi to everyone I passed on the street. 10% would be like, don't talk to me, some negative reaction. 10% might stop and be like, hey, how's it going? And engage in a short conversation. The vast majority would just be like, hey, and walk on. And again, I'm like, oh, I'm not vaporized. After that, I started incrementally increasing my exposure. Those people that stopped, I started to increase the length of those conversations. Then I started to introduce more of my humor and my own personality into those interactions. Then I started maybe the people I wanted to get to know better, going for a phone number, going for contact information, and again, incrementally increasing my exposure. And then treating it as practice. Just as you would practice a sport or the guitar, practicing social interaction can also be beneficial. You just see it as a skill. You're building a skill. And of course, during this process, remember to reward yourself for every successful interaction. And this doesn't have to be like a physical reward. You go get an ice cream. It's simply acknowledging your success, and the fact that you push through that anxiety can be very, very powerful. And finally, you can seek professional help. If social anxiety is significantly impacting your life, it can be very beneficial to seek out somebody who's made this their life's work for 20 years to help people navigate these issues and has been doing so very successfully. So now let's see how the confession actually plays out. Let's see the aftermath.
I had no idea.
And I feel, my friendship with you means a great deal. And I don't want you to think that I would even continue lying to you.
It's very brave of you to tell me this.
Instead of trying to move on to another topic, Core sat with her and began sharing things that he had never told Trisha in their nearly 20 years of friendship. His confession opens the floodgates to actually talking for the first time. So how are you feeling?
Fantastic.
So ultimately, Skeet's prefrontal cortex managed to regain control, and he was able to go through the confession. Now, this process can be very easily related to the social struggles that many of us encounter, like introducing yourself to that new person that you want to connect with. So let's take a look at the steps that he went through in order to make that happen. First of all, he recognized the fear. The first step to overcoming such a potent emotional response is to just call it out, to recognize it. You might feel your heart racing, your palms sweating, or that overall sense of physical tension when you're thinking about going up to someone. It's crucial that you actually acknowledge this fear. You don't tamp it down. You put a spotlight on it. You drag it into the light. You don't just put it under the carpet. It's a normal and universal human response. It's not something to suppress or ignore. By identifying that you're feeling that fear response, you start that process of emotional regulation. The next step is reappraisal. Once you recognize the fear, Skeet had to reappraise the situation. And this is a strategy where you just change the way you think about a situation. You do so actively. In the case of meeting somebody, this might mean changing the mindset from, what if they don't like me? What if they don't like me? What if that's their significant other? To, this is an opportunity to meet somebody interesting. And worst case scenario, they're not interested. Oh well. Realize that you're speculating about the negative outcome. You're not clairvoyant. And then say to yourself, well, look, if I'm going to speculate, I might as well tell myself a better story. It's going to go awesome. The next step is exerting self-control. As he evaluated the situation, he began to exert self-control to suppress that intense emotional response. Now, we don't know what was going on in his mind, but it's possible that he reminded himself of the rehearsals. He reminded himself that the worst case scenario of her blowing up wasn't life-threatening. He might have thought about the importance of this confession for his emotional health. Once you've reframed your thoughts, you've got to exert control over the emotional response. And this can mean using calming techniques to slow your heart, mentally reminding yourself it's not a life or death thing, but just a social interaction. You can consciously scan your body from head to toe for physical tension and then consciously release it before you take action. Well, the final step was committing to action, was deciding to go through with the confession. In spite of all of his fear, he was able to commit to his original plan and carry it through. When you're meeting new people, ultimately you got to decide to go through with it, to step up, to approach and introduce yourself to that new person. And this is the stage where you push past those butterflies in your stomach and you make the move. Now remember, this process isn't always linear. You might find yourself cycling through these steps multiple times before you feel ready to take action. But the important thing is to remember that it's normal to feel anxious in these situations, and that with practice and repetition, you can become much, much more comfortable with them. Moreover, like Skeet, you'll probably find that the anticipated negative outcome is far worse in your imagination than what actually occurs in reality, and this can lead to more authentic, plentiful, and more meaningful connections. Communication, it's far more than a simple information exchange. It involves building a shared understanding. It involves building an emotional connection, and authenticity is key in that process. That's very often overlooked. Authenticity is very deeply intertwined with our emotional state, and it's conveyed through verbal and nonverbal cues like body language, vocal tonality, facial expression, etc. So in Skeet's case, his nervousness, his agitation, and ultimately his relief at getting it off his chest, these were all part of his authentic emotional experience, and that's what made his confession genuine. And again, it led to a more positive reaction from Trisha than he expected. It actually ended up strengthening their friendship and really showcasing the power of authentic, emotionally charged communication. Skeet's story here, it's far from unique, and that's why I chose to showcase it for this video. A lot of us face similar situations in our own lives that can seem impossible to navigate. But what we can learn from all this is that it's very possible to confront and overcome these obstacles. We can disentangle ourselves from these knots of tension. We can manage our emotional responses, and we can lead a life of authenticity, spontaneity, and open communication. So if you're dealing with similar issues, I invite you to join my 8-week Charisma Mentoring Program. Over the course of this program, I'll work very closely with you to understand your personal challenges and help you to develop effective strategies to deal with them. And this program, as I said, it draws from a broad range of disciplines, including acting and improv, peak performance athletic coaching, goal setting, resilience training, and much, much more. If you want details, click on that link in the description below. So remember, change, particularly in this area, it's not easy, but if you're patient and you understand what to do and you persist, you can shape your responses to be far more in line with who you truly are and who you want to be. And I'm here to guide and support you through this process. This has been Jeffy, and I'll see you next time.
Chris Gonzalez here. I feel like I stuffed myself down for the longest time. And so now, going back to just expressing myself, it feels grand. To the point where people smile around me, people say, hey, you have a nice personality. Today, one of my coworkers actually came into my office. She goes, hey, Chris, you want to hear a funny story? And people come up to me. And so it just seems like the better I feel, the better people feel around me, and the more they want to interact with me, and it feels great. You seem more intelligent, especially in a business setting. It's something I need to use on an everyday basis, you know, for my job and in business. I really appreciate this. This is something I'm going to continue doing. And I just want to say thank you to Jeffy, his team, and make it happen, guys.